Headings or chapters. January 1945, Luzon, Philippines. Dawn breaks slowly through low jungle mist, the air heavy with humidity and the smell of wet earth. American guards stand quietly as a small column of exhausted Japanese prisoners of war shuffles forward. Their uniforms are torn, boots cracked, faces hollow from months of hunger. Somewhere nearby, a metal pot begins to boil. The sharp, unfamiliar aroma of roasted coffee drifts across the camp, cutting through the stillness like a signal flare. For many of these men, it is a smell they have never known. This moment matters because it sits at the collision point of two wartime worlds. By 1945, Imperial Japan's military ideology had trained its soldiers to expect death over capture, starvation over surrender, and cruelty from the enemy. American forces, advancing across the Pacific after years of brutal island fighting, had encountered an opponent conditioned to believe that captivity under Western powers meant humiliation and abuse. What happened inside American POW camps did not erase the violence of the war, but it challenged assumptions that had been drilled into Japanese soldiers since their first day of training. Before the war, coffee and chocolate were luxury items in Japan, rare imports consumed by elites or in urban cafes. Cigarettes existed, but wartime shortages and rationing made them scarce even for frontline troops. By the later years of the conflict, Japanese soldiers often survived on meager rice portions, sometimes reduced to roots, grass, or captured supplies. Official military doctrine emphasized endurance through deprivation as a moral virtue. Hunger was not merely a condition, it was a test of loyalty. Japanese soldiers who surrendered expected punishment. Imperial propaganda warned that Americans were barbaric, racially inferior, and vengeful. Surrender, they were told, would lead to torture or execution. Many POWs later recorded that they anticipated beatings, starvation, or being displayed as animals. Instead, they encountered mess halls, ration cards, and standardized meals governed by military regulations and the Geneva Convention. American records from the Pacific Theater show that POW rations, while not luxurious, were consistent. A typical daily allocation included bread, meat or fish, vegetables, sugar, and, most astonishing to the prisoners, coffee. U.S. Army supply manuals treated coffee not as a treat, but as a morale necessity. Chocolate bars were issued as field rations. Cigarettes were distributed routinely, regardless of rank or nationality. These items flowed from an industrial system capable of feeding millions of soldiers across oceans. Former Japanese POW Mineo Fujita later wrote that the first cup of coffee he received in captivity left a deeper impression than any interrogation. The bitterness shocked him, but the warmth lingered. He noted that it was served without mockery, without condition. U.S. Army medical officers documented weight gain among prisoners within weeks of capture, a quiet statistical contradiction to what they had been taught to believe. The contrast was unsettling. These men had marched under banners promising spiritual superiority through sacrifice, yet here, in enemy hands, they were fed better than they had been by their own command. Chocolate, once unimaginable, was handed out in small squares. Cigarettes became a shared ritual, smoke curling upward in the evenings, momentarily dissolving the lines between captor and captive. Coffee returned again and again, morning after morning, a dark liquid symbolizing consistency rather than indulgence. This was not benevolence without reason. American military planners understood that adequate nutrition reduced disease, improved order, and complied with international law. Still, for the prisoners, the effect was ideological. U.S. psychological warfare units later reported that humane treatment of POWs spread rapidly through rumor, weakening enemy resolve in some areas. Leaflets promised food and medical care to those who surrendered, and the promises proved true often enough to matter. Historical documents from Camp O'Donnell and other POW facilities in the Philippines and Okinawa show meticulous record-keeping, calorie counts, medical inspections, supply logs. One U.S. officer wrote that the Japanese prisoners were astonished by the regularity of meals. Astonishment in this context was not about generosity but predictability. Coffee arrived every day. Cigarettes were counted, not withheld. Chocolate appeared without ceremony. Over time, this routine altered perception. Some prisoners later admitted that captivity forced them to question the ideology that had defined their lives. If the enemy was supposed to be cruel, why did he offer food? If surrender was dishonor, why did survival feel strangely human? Not all prisoners embraced these questions, but the seed was planted. Abundance, when paired with restraint, carried its own argument. Coffee became the recurring symbol of this transformation. It was not Japanese in origin, not traditional, not ceremonial, yet it represented industrial capacity, logistical reach, and a certain democratic sameness. Every soldier, every prisoner receiving the same cup. Bitter, dark, and plain, it did not flatter the senses, but it endured. Like the system that produced it, it functioned reliably. After the war, many former POWs returned to a devastated Japan. Cities lay in ruins, food shortages persisted, and ideology had collapsed along with the empire. Some remembered the coffee first, then the chocolate, then the cigarettes. These memories did not erase wartime suffering or justify violence, but they complicated the narrative. The enemy had not behaved as expected. Power, they realized, could express itself through provision as well as destruction. In memoirs written decades later, a few former prisoners described American captivity as the moment when certainty cracked. They had been taught that democracy was weak, decadent, and chaotic, yet its armies fed even their enemies with mechanical regularity. Freedom, in this sense, was not abstract. It arrived as a hot cup passed across a counter, no questions asked. The war ended, but the smell of coffee remained. It lingered as a reminder that abundance, when governed by rules rather than impulse, could undermine even the hardest doctrines. In the quiet of post-war reflection, that bitterness came to symbolize something larger, that systems built on production, law, and shared obligation could outlast systems built solely on obedience and sacrifice. In a conflict defined by extremes, sometimes the most powerful weapon was not a bomb or a bullet, but a simple cup, steaming gently in the dawn.